Hello and welcome to the OTB channel. It's time for another ramble, but a little bit more focused than usual. What I'm going to talk about today is my experiences of getting DWM up and running. It's not a how-to, it's just how I've done it, and if you're interested in that, well, I'll see you after the intro. Okay, welcome back everyone. So I figured out it was time to do a ramble. Little bit different to normal because my working routine has changed over the last couple of weeks. As those on my Facebook group are well aware, I've pretty much started working full time again, and that's meant that the amount of videos that I'm putting out at the moment has unfortunately fallen, and that's just because of the pressures of work. What has happened, though, is I've still had a couple of hours each evening to have a play. And a couple of hours isn't enough time to produce a video, but it is enough time to do some experimentation. And a few weeks ago, I did that video on becoming a Tylerholic, and I mentioned, what next? Will it be DWM? Well, after all, Luke Smith tells us all we should be installing it. So I thought, well, you know, why not? Just for a challenge, let's see if I can. And in many ways, it was a challenge because, as some of you may know, there is no documentation to speak of on the Suckler's website, or rather the documentation's there, but it's the source code. And being told that isn't a great deal of help if you're not a programmer or you've got no knowledge of C code, which I haven't. So I hit the Google foo and I madly searched all sorts of articles by people. I had a look at Reddit, I watched YouTube videos, and I sort of got the idea of a cobbled together idea, if you like, of how to install DWM and how to configure it. So I'm going to take you through the process that I've gone through. I'm sure the process that I've gone through wouldn't be correct as far as the Suckler's guys are concerned, but it seems to be working for me. And it's been a process that I've essentially used based on trial and error. I've tried something, it hasn't worked, so I've tried something else. And I've eventually got there, and I now have a desktop. Let me just go to the desktop and show you what I've got. So here you go. You can see my DWM desktop in front of you. It's not the default by any stretch of the imagination. And you can see that I've got some status stuff up on the bar there. And if I open a terminal, I'm pretty much following the color scheme that, well, I use everywhere, my Nord color scheme, which works pretty well. And I've got most of the things that I use here, the shortcuts to say open Genie or to use the super key, which I'm using the Windows key rather than the Alt key, which is the default in DWM. And oh yeah, I've got things like my Rofi launching, and essentially I've got it working like all the other window managers that I've got. What I've found since I've been using these different tilers is they all pretty much work in the same way. The ones that I've spent the most time with so far are BSPWM, Spectre, I'm on Xmonad at the moment, and now this one. And for the most part, because you're going to configure them to what you want them to do, they end up doing pretty much the same thing as each other. So there's not a huge amount of difference. The biggest difference, perhaps, is in terms of the workspaces or tags, as DWM defines them, how they actually work. With BSPWM, I had 4 workspaces per monitor, and they were independent workspaces. So I had workspace 1 to 4 on my primary monitor and workspaces 5 to 8 on my secondary monitor. I found that a really comfortable way to work. Spectre and Xmonad work a little bit differently. There you have a set number of workspaces. Do they call them workspaces? Can't quite remember. But anyway, you have a set number of workspaces, but they are not monitor independent. So if I had, for instance, something open on workspace 9 on my secondary monitor, and this happened to be my primary monitor, if I went to workspace 9 here, it would bring over whatever was on it. So all good. I quite like that. It works for me. With DWM, it seems to work a little bit differently. We have 9 tags by default, and each monitor has 9 tags, 9 independent tags. So it's a different way of doing things. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a different way of doing things. And yeah, I've started to get the system how I want it. There's a couple of things that I still need to change. I've got this status line up here, which is running from a program called DWM blocks, and it essentially reads a little script for each of these sections. I'm still looking for a way to get individual colours for the text on each of the sections. I haven't found a patch that seems to do exactly what I want as yet, but I will do. And I'm going to cut down this 9 tags. I don't need 9 tags. I'm probably going to cut it down to 4 or 5 tags, and probably replace the numbers with icons a little bit like I've done on BSPWM, but it's all possible. So, how did I go about doing this? So that's what it looks like so far. It's a work in progress. I mentioned I'm looking for a patch for the colours, and patches are a big thing of what I'm going to cover today. But when I was initially looking at installing it, yes, there are binary versions available in the Arch repos. I don't think there's one in the Void repo, but given that this seemed to be a window manager that every time you made a change to it, you had to recompile it, downloading a package from a repo seemed to be a bit irrelevant. So what I ended up doing was just doing a git clone from the Suckless guys, getting the source code in a folder on my in my home partition, and working from that. And it was pretty easy, the initial install, I've got to say, because once I'd git cloned DWM, I simply cd'd into it, and I ran the command sudo make install, and ba-bum. That was it. It compiled. It compiles in seconds. It's not a difficult program to install. Of course, doing it that way means that I have no integration with LightDM or anything like that. So I had to create a startup script and then a desktop folder in the USR share X sessions folder for DWM, and point LightDM to the startup script. Fairly straightforward to do. As some of you who've been watching my videos before will know, once I started using window managers, I also use LightDM to set the resolutions on both monitors. I have a little XR&R script which LightDM runs as soon as I log in. So all good, that was working. But they have a very different philosophy, the Suckless guys. Let me just go to the split screen here, and you will see their website here. The big thing here, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, it's all about just having a single binary and source code that is never intended to exceed 2,000 lines. Okay. Now, because it's never going to exceed 2,000 lines, that means its basic functionality is just that. It's quite basic. It can be quite usable, but its functionality isn't as extensive as the likes of Xmonad out of the box. You can, however, extend its functionality by patching the source code, which is a big part of the initial configuration. So, okay, I had to get my head around that. And when I read here, it also says, they make a comment here that because DWM is customized through editing its source code, it's pointless to make binary packages of it. This keeps its user base small and elitist. No novices asking stupid questions. There are some distributions that provide binary packages, though. Okay. Well, when I did my video saying who are Linux users, and I categorized them, the Suckless guys would very much fall into that philosopher strand. They have a particular philosophy that they want to follow. They're not trying to attract new users. You get the impression from reading through everything that if you don't understand C, well, you know, that's that. If you want to install and configure DWM, it can all be done in the source code. You just need to read the source code and you can change anything you need to. So that's something of a challenge for somebody who doesn't understand any programming languages, and more than that, doesn't really want to. It's not an interest of mine. But, okay, great. I can see where they're coming from, and I'm not unsympathetic to their viewpoint, not by any stretch of the imagination. And the fact that they make it really clear from the get-go exactly what you have to do to get things done is great. But for somebody like me who can't just go into the source code, I might as well be reading Latin. It does make it difficult to get a grasp on how you actually change and configure the system. So let's just talk about what I've figured out. So what you'll see now, this is what's inside the DWM folder in my home/Steve folder. This is the source code for DWM. What you'll also see is these packages, all starting with DWM, which are various patches that I've installed to give DWM more functionality. What I should have said, I just realized from the last section, when I first compiled this, I didn't just run sudo make install, I ran sudo make clean install. And I believe the reason we run sudo make clean install is it copies this, the file called config.def.h, to another file that's just called config.h. These files are essentially the same. The config.h file is where you would make your local changes. The config.def.h is the example configuration that comes from Suckless. Okay, so I found that when I was compiling that if either of these two were different to each other, I was coming up with all sorts of errors. So actually what I've been doing, and I'm sure this isn't correct, is when I've been, and I'll just open this in Genie because it's easier to see with the video, when I've been making a change to this file, after saving it, I've also copied it across to the config.def.h file. Okay, probably not the right thing to do, but hey-ho. So there are all sorts of patches that you can apply for additional functionality. And patches are actually fairly straightforward things. If I open up one of them here that I've just recently applied, it's called Tag to Other Monitor. What this does is it gives you the functionality to send a window over to the other monitor but to tag it on a particular tag on the other monitor. So if the window's currently on tag 3 on my primary monitor, it gives me the functionality to send it to tag 9 on my secondary monitor. Okay, take that as read. But looking at what a diff file looks like, and these are the patches, it's actually quite readable once you get to grips with it. What this is telling us is it's going to make 4 changes in the config.def.h file, and it's going to make 33 changes in the DWM.c file. Okay, and these consist of 36 additions and 1 deletion. Right, so moving down, we move to the changes, or the 4 changes that are going to be made to the config.def.h file. And you can see what's going to be added and what's going to be taken away by looking at the beginning of these lines. If there's a minus, that line is to be deleted. If there's going to be a plus there, those 3 lines are going to be added. The ones above it without the plus or minus are just to give you a grip of where you can find the relevant lines. We then have exactly the same thing with the DWM.c file, and until you get to the end. And so all of these lines are actually being added to config.def.h. Now, the way you apply a patch, let me just shut that down, is quite simple in theory. You would simply cd to your DWM directory, if that's where you've saved your patches, and you would just use the standard patch -p less than, and then point it to one of the patches. And ideally, it should all patch and all is good. Ideally. The trouble is, these patches are based on being built for the correct version. I think this is 6.2, but if we look there, that is for 6.2, so you shouldn't have too many problems there. But some of them go all the way back to 2016. Oh, come on. Okay, it doesn't want to come up now. 2018, etc., etc. So it's quite possible that the configuration file has changed since these patches were produced. There's an additional problem, and that is the more patches that you apply, well, that's going to change the line numbers in the source code. And so subsequent patches after the first one, assuming that applies okay, are probably going to have difficulties patching correctly. And this is what I found. I applied my first patch, which I think was this auto start patch, which created the facility in DWM to read an auto start file to start things like nitrogen, etc., etc. That applied cleanly. After that first patch, nothing else was applying cleanly. So what I resorted to doing was patching everything manually. So I would simply open up the patch and first of all go through what it asked me to change in, where are we, config.def.h, open up both files if you like, and I added and deleted the lines that the patch told me to add or delete. So a bit of a painful process, especially when you've got a patch that makes a lot of changes. Nevertheless, at least you're ensuring you're getting it right. What I was then doing, well, there are 2 things that you can do then if it saves everything in config.def.h. If you try and recompile at that point, your standard config.h is going to be different. So you have 2 approaches. You can either delete the config.h, and when you do a sudo make clean install, it will recreate it for you. Or you can simply copy config.def.h to config.h once you've done the changes. So what I was tending to do is I was opening up the likes of config.def.h, and then after I'd saved that, I was just doing a save as on this and saving it also to config.h. I'm sure this is the wrong way to do it, but it works, and it's worked for me, and everything seems to be compiling cleanly. The other file that seems to get patched quite a lot is this dwm.c, and this goes on, well, for a lot of lines, an awful lot of lines. So, and some of them, it took me quite a long time to apply the patch changes to that. But anyway, as you can see, I've applied, what, 3, 6, I've applied 8 patches so far. And in fact, there's another one that I haven't applied here. Excuse me. I wanted a little bit of padding on my bar as well for the text, just a pixel, you know, top and bottom. And there is a patch on the DWM site to do that, but I couldn't get it to work. It kept screwing up everything. In fact, it kept stopping all the status items from appearing. But I found a more recent patch over on GitHub. Someone had one, and that seemed to apply cleanly. So, hey, so it's a bit of a rigmarole. But ultimately, it worked, and once you've got it all changed with the patch, what you want to do is sudo make install. Once your config.def.h and your config.h are the same, hit that. And there we are. It's compiled cleanly, and it's put the binary in USR local bin DWM. Right, great. So that's all working. I'm not using the standard Git that some of the suckless developers seem to use here, but what I have been doing is I've applied each patch and tested it, is I've been uploading the build to my GitLab. So I have got a degree of version control there. Because there's many ways to skin a cat, and this is just one of those ways that I found to actually work, so all good. Right, yeah, so I'm pretty happy with it. I've got a bit of transparency going there. I sort of know what's going on. If I'm opening a terminal there, you can see it's coming out as floating, but I can make it full tiled again. It just works. So I've got a few little tweaks to make, but generally it's good. One of the things that I had particular trouble with was getting these status items up here. And I did try creating a number of different bash scripts and using an xset root command and trying to get them all onto the bar, but I didn't like the way it looked. So what I ended up doing was installing DWM blocks. And DWM blocks is again from Suckless. You go through the same process. You sudo make clean install to install it initially, and then the configuration is in blocks.h, and I'll open Genie again just to show you what's there. I'll just shut that one down. And there's not a huge amount there, to be honest. And you simply point all of the different sections there to the scripts that you've written to output this on the top. So, yeah, it sort of works. What problems have I had so far? Well, the main problem that I had was getting all the status items to appear on the bar. DWM was starting up fine, but I wasn't getting the status items on the bar, even though I was starting DWM blocks in my startup file. And I couldn't figure out why that was the problem, because once I was in DWM, I could just start up DWM blocks and everything would appear. So, okay. So I played around and I thought, I wonder if it has something to do with LightDM and my startup script. So I created an xinitRC file to start up DWM. I disabled Light DM and I went in using StartX. And hey ho, all my status items actually appeared. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not sure what's going on there. It's probably something to do with DWM, Light DM, but how am I going to resolve that? And I thought, well, one way to resolve it could be to actually point Light DM through to my xinit.rc file. So I did that. And everything started up, but once again, no status items. And again, I could start them manually, but they weren't appearing on startup. So this took a fair amount of Google foo, and I eventually came across a Reddit post, and I can't remember who it was, who made some mention, somebody else had been having the same problem, that it's all to do with your path being exported at a particular point. And if you just export your path in .bashrc, it's too late. So by the time DWM has launched, you haven't got your status items. Don't fully understand this, but the answer was quite simple. It was simply to put my export path lines for DWM blocks into .profile rather than .bashrc. So I did that, and everything works. So there's something to do with when your path is actually created, when your path is actually exported, and it's got to happen at a certain point before DWM blocks is called. So the situation I've got at the moment is Light DM is actually pointing to my xinit.rc file, and I'm exporting my path no longer in bashrc, but in .profile. I wish I knew exactly why that was, but it's worked consistently 100% of the time. So that's where I've got to so far with DWM. I wouldn't say it's hard to put together. It's a bit of a pain doing the patching, but once you've done the patching, it's done, and you then have a portable folder. And I've found that I've dropped that over into Void, and it works brilliantly. I've dropped it into Debian. It works brilliantly. You can take it wherever. I've got it up on GitLab, and if I ever have to do a clean install again, I just pull it down and do that. So there's portability there. In terms of patches, though, if you want to kind of follow along what I've done, what I would strongly suggest that you do, and I fell foul of this method a few times, is not all patches necessarily work, because some patches conflict with other patches. So apply a patch, test it to make sure everything works before you then apply another patch. And don't attempt to try and, by any stretch of the imagination, apply every patch. Be quite selective. So over the course of the week, I've just been doing an extra one, an extra one, an extra one. So that's it for today, my little ramble about DWM. What do I think of it so far? I think it's fine. You can make it into whatever you want. If I was going to talk about favourites so far, I think Spectre and Xmonad are pretty much on a par at the moment. I know Xmonad is more configurable, but I only have a basic configuration which suits me, and so Spectre actually does what I need it to do. But I'm really comfortable with Xmonad and Spectre. Does DWM appear to have anything that's going to kind of drag me away from them? Hard to tell at the moment. It's early days. And I seem to be in a routine at the moment where I'll spend a month on each tiling window manager. At the moment, I'm on Xmonad after spending a month with Spectre. But whilst I'm spending a month with a window manager, I'm also looking towards what I'm going to be using next and configuring that so I can cleanly move over to it. So at the end of a month, when I finish with Xmonad and I move over to DWM, who knows, my opinion might completely change and DWM might win me over. There's nothing wrong with it. It's fine as far as the tiling window manager is concerned, and you can make it do pretty much anything you want it to do. So that's it for today, guys. Just a little extra ramble. Don't forget to join me on LBRY. I've created a subreddit now. Please come and see me there. Finally got the karma so I can do it. And by all means, come and join the Facebook group. Enjoy your day. I'm doing this on a Sunday, but you probably won't see the video until Monday. But enjoy what's left of the weekend, or I hope you had a good weekend anyway. Cheers, guys.